I think one of the first things you'll notice is that we have called this session navigation, not orientation animations. And I know this is going to break a lot of hearts, especially those of you who are experienced Fulldome users. But when you're flying from place to place, from body to body in space, you are no longer going to use orientation animations. I see some happiness from some of our people.
Yay.
Well, and if that makes you sad, it's not because we've made it more difficult, it's because we've made it much, much, much easier. For the less experienced ones in the group, I hasten to call you newbies or anything, I'm not going to do that, but you guys will remember that there's a fundamental problem with flying from place to place in Starry Night, and it goes back 20 plus years. And it's Starry Night trying to be smart, right? It's Starry Night trying to take over your flight and do smart things like, if I'm going to fly from Earth to Mars, I've got to watch Mars spin into view. And then if we're flying over the Earth, well, sometimes the Earth's got to get out of the way, right? So it pushes the Earth over here. Well, Starry Night assumed that the North Pole always had to be pointing up at the zenith of the dome, so it would spin things around. This is my long way around the barn of saying Starry Night would make all of these visual decisions for us that we just wanted to make ourselves, right? So I'll give you an example. I think I'll fly to Jupiter here.
I'm afraid I can't see your screen, Scott.
Have I not shared?
You have not.
Well, I'm such a dumbass about this sometimes.
But I'm sure it was awesome.
No, I didn't do it yet. You caught me.
Scott, your screen is being shared.
Is it? Good to know. It's so useful when you guys tell me that I have shared my screen. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, actually, let's make this a fine for just a moment. I'll do the same thing going to Earth. Let's get ourselves close to Jupiter here, and then I'll fly us to the Earth. And what's going to happen is Starry Night will decide to do a lot of movements for it. Push Jupiter out of the way. Rotate the entire sky so that it does that for some reason. We don't know why, because it's going to rotate it back again. And then it's going to orient us to the Earth, and we're going to fly up to the Earth. And for some reason, it'll probably do some dumb last minute winning. Those are all the things that we had to contend with orientation animations, because as soon as we said go there, as soon as we established a trip in ATM4 land, Starry Night would do all those things whether we wanted them to or not. And the one thing that I had been hoping that ATM4 could do for us for a long time is to take us from place to place and completely ignore any change in view. We really wanted to just go somewhere and put it entirely in our hands as to when we were going to look around. And so this is now what we call navigation, or navigate to. There is a new control. I believe it's in all of your preview suites, and you can navigate to someplace now. So if we right click and undergo there, we find the one underneath it that's navigate to. It's a way, way, way better way to take a trip. It's much better than go there, but it's still going to do a little centering for you. This navigate to was intended entirely for live situations. Somebody raises their hand, I want to go to Pluto, and you're not set up to go to Pluto. You can still navigate to a place. So we're going to navigate to Mercury. We pull away from the Earth. We do one center onto Mercury, and then we fly up to Mercury. It's a vastly, vastly improved trip, right? But we want to give you even more control when you're doing flights in ATM4. And that's why we created a new navigation in UI. But what you'll be able to do is either make a favorite that is just navigation. You say, this favorite is just going to fly me to a place. Or you'll be able to like right click on the body and say, make a navigation favorite. Right now, if you want this favorite, you kind of have to build it from scratch. And for the advanced folks at the end of the session, if we have time, I'll show you quickly how to make these favorites. But basically, this is going to work like the layered Earth or like Zygote. In the layered Earth, if you make a favorite and you change your location, that change in location is just built into the favorite. It's just part of the favorite. Same thing with Starry Night. You can now make a kind of a favorite that's a navigation favorite. And the beauty of the navigation favorite is you can choose to just go somewhere or to center, but you do them independently, okay? Here is what I mean. If I want to fly to Venus right now, if I click this little favorite that I've made that's a navigate favorite to take me to Venus, a really cool thing is going to happen. We're going to back away from Mercury. We will end up close to Venus, but our view will never, ever change. The sun's going to stay where it is. The background stars are going to stay where they is. Venus is going to be pegged right in the middle of the dome. And watch what happens. We're going to navigate to Venus. I had goosebumps the first time I saw this. I know it's boring, but you know what happened? We didn't look around. Starry Night didn't make any decisions for us about looking around. If I want to look around, I use the little favorite I made called Center Venus. The beauty of this now is that I can stack these up. I can do the flying in the direction of an object and the center of that object at any time that I want. So if we fly to Earth and then sort of mid-flight, we decide to look at Earth, again, I have 100% control over when that happens. And we can also set a value for how long it takes as well. That can be a quick center or a slow center. And we just do a beautiful fly up to the Earth. And it gets even cooler. If I want to fly to the moon, what if I want to look at the moon first? Without going anywhere, I can center on the moon. And then, without any weird twists or turns or moving around, fly to the moon. How cool is that?
Very.
I could
Woo!
be all happy for a moment. I would love it. I mean, I'm just so tickled with the work Clint has done here. It just gives us absolute freedom. All right. So here's one thing to keep in mind. Here's the way the structure of building your shows with flights is going to work now. To go from body to body, you will use navigate to or navigate. Once you're at the body, then you can use OAs the way you used to, but they're only going to be just moving around with that body. What I like about that is ATM4 and Starry Night have always done that in a very pretty way, right? It's the trip from place to place that's ugly, but moving around a body works really nicely as an orientation animation. So let's talk about how this is going to work in scripts. Okay, I think I'll take us back to the Earth. By the way, spacebar still works, okay? So if I navigate to the Earth and I want to get there really quickly, I can use spacebar to get us there quickly. All right, so we're going to create an ATM4 script. Let's fly to Jupiter. And once we arrive at Jupiter, then we're going to position ourselves in some way where we're looking at Jupiter the way we want to, right? So let's say, for the sake of argument, we're going to navigate to Jupiter, we're going to center Jupiter, but we're going to be at one random point with respect to Jupiter. I'm not really sure where we're going to end up. That's one thing about navigate is you don't control where you end up. You're going to do that with OAs later. But I'm going to move over into ATM4 world and let's make a new script. And well, we've got to decide where we're starting, right? I mean, I'm just sitting over the Earth right now. So we should probably create a starting point with respect to the Earth. So how are we going to do that? What's our step for beginning somewhere? Just like the old OA process, what we going to do? Going to make a favorite probably, right? So let's position ourselves somewhere kind of cool with respect to the Earth. I don't know. We'll start here, okay? So I'm going to create a favorite. For you beginners, I'm just going to do this by hitting Control S. I'm going to make a new favorite. And let's just call this start to keep it simple, okay? All right, so in my ATM4 script, near the beginning of my show. I'm going to put a scene in my show. And I think everything is in navigation. Start. All right, so all I've done is in my script, I've said, this is where my show begins, basically, right? It begins at this starting point. Just as a review for our less experienced guys, I'm also going to grab a black scene and put it at the beginning of my show because I like being able to rewind my show and clear out what's on my dome. So now, if I rewind, my dome goes black. Let's get rid of our, so you guys can see what's happening on my dome here. So I've rewound my show, my dome has gone black, and what we should see when I begin my show is that start favorite that we created. There's the oith, to quote Dave Bradstreet. All right, now if I want to go somewhere, again, I have two kinds of favorites. I have ones that take me to the object without looking around, and I have centers. I have just, as a convention, just to keep it simple for me, I've called the ones that are navigate favorites just the name of the object. So if we want to fly to Jupiter, I'm going to select Jupiter as my favorite. So shortly after this favorite, we're going to fly navigate to Jupiter. So I'm going to put in a scene. By the way, ignore all these goofy, odd looking things. I've just, I was trying to sort of get them to look a certain way and I didn't do as good a job as I thought I would. So ignore the fact that they look goofy. These are just normal favorites with normal file names. So I'm going to put Jupiter in as a navigation favorite. All right. So what I should see now when I launch that favorite is we see our Earth. And then we should just back away from the Earth in the direction. Oh, that's interesting. I wonder why it did that. Let's look at that again. I'm going to look at my scene and notice how my scene takes a second to fade up. Well, my Jupiter scene takes a second to crossfade. So what I want to do here is make sure that I don't have any transition at all. I don't want it to fade into that. I want it to instantly start moving. So here's a rule about these favorites, and we'll probably make this a default. They'll probably load with no fade when we start making these guys. But for the time being, we want to make sure that we don't have a slow transition. So here's the scene, and notice I don't get this goofy fade now that I have the time set to 0. So we're going to back away, and eventually we should end up at Jupiter. But somewhere in the middle of that flight, somewhere in there, and I don't know how far it is, I'm just going to test it and see it. I want to center Jupiter. I'm going to do it mid-flight. So let's say, where is Jupiter? Jupiter center. And that's the new favorite I put there. So now what we should see is, did I make a mistake though? Did I forget to do something? Anybody remember? I don't want to crossfade.
Right, you need to set the transition to 0.
Oh, sorry, that's the wrong thing. I'm looking in the wrong place. Here we go. Set that to 0, right? Okay. Now what we should see is, again, our opening scene. We begin backing away from Jupiter. We turn and center on Jupiter. And eventually it comes up and we see it. Okay. Now I do have the ability to set these rates, but it's a little tricky right now. So I think what I'll do is I'm going to base this on a little bit shorter flight. Rather than flying all the way to Jupiter, to change this to Mars, I'm just going to go in and select a Mars favorite. And I'm going to tell it when we center, I want to center on Mars. Okay. So that should be a little quicker trip. Somebody asked in the chat if you've gotten those favorite files yet. The answer is no right now. I just built these for this session, but I showed this off in another course, and I invited everybody in that group. If they want these favorites, I will send them to you. Okay. So that center was a little late and a little slow, but you guys get the idea. And if these look a little goofy, understand we're also tweaking a little of this, but you guys get the basic idea, okay? So this is going to be the way that you use going forward to go from body to body to body to body, all right? Much more simplified over the old OAs, much easier to understand, and also, in my humble opinion, much prettier. So, all right, so let us say that we have taken this trip to Mars. And now what we want to do is an orientation animation that takes us nearer to the surface of Mars. And perhaps I want to drop it, I don't know, lower on my dome. I want it to match this view of my Earth. This is where we're now going to do orientation animations. And for those of you who are new to this, who have never done an orientation animation, an OA is just a thing that you do in Starry Night that gets spit out later. That's hard to say. Spit out later in ATM4, okay? So I want to do an orientation animation that moves us around with respect to Mars. So I would like fly up to Mars and I would spin Mars around. So if I start monkeying around with my preview screen, am I going to be doing interesting flights with respect to Mars? I am not, because ATM4 only talks to the render box. Over here on the render box, up on my dome, we have flown up to Mars, but ATM4 is not commanding Starry Night to do anything, right? Whoops, I just messed everything up, but let's take us back to Mars here. Sorry, guys, I should not have clicked on a favorite. That was my bad. One more time, just to make sure we got this all going here. I'm going to fly us to Mars. So we go in the direction of Mars, and then we pan Mars into view. And at some point fairly soon, we should fly up to Mars. The issue here is that over in my pre-flight, this view doesn't match at all. So if I want to start building orientation animations, what I need to do is a little trick called refresh our dome settings. Why the heck? Oh, that's why. Sorry, guys. So what I want to do is refresh my dome settings where Mars is here. And I'll make sure I don't click a favorite again like I did twice. I want to get my pre-flight to match my dome. And there's a little button here that says refresh the local settings from the dome. I will review this a few times, folks. But this is for the advanced folks. Just remember that after you've made your trip, in order to do this orientation animation, you still need to refresh settings so that your orientation animation matches what you see on the dome, okay? If that's all gobbledygook, I'll review this again in just a second. So here is where we're going to start doing the orientation animation trick. Let's say for the sake of argument, after I've arrived or around the time that I arrive at Mars, what I want to do is get closer to Mars. And I want to tug Mars down so it's a little lower on the dome like that. That's where I want to end up after my orientation animation. So all I do over in ATM4 is I create a thing called an orientation animation. And I don't know exactly where to put it. I'm going to have to watch this whole thing to see, but I'm going to create an OA. And let's say I want Mars to kind of move down on the dome and us to get closer to it, both of those things kind of slowly. I just tell it, flying up close to the dome, do it slow. Move down near the bottom of the dome, do it slow. Okay. So I'm going to run my script now and let's see what I've got. We have our scene. We have our flight. We have our center happening. Now, one thing I want to point out, Clint has not yet worked out a way to really instantly, when we get to the body, put us into its local orientation. For those of you who are really familiar with orientations, the last step that Clint needs to do is when we arrive at Mars or Jupiter or Saturn or wherever, it needs to behave like it's in the local orientation. Right now, it's behaving like we're connected to the sun. So if those orientation animations don't look really intuitive right now, that's why. Clint has one step to do. But regardless of how this is all working right now, I want everybody to understand how we're going to do these trips going forward in the future. So again, the process is going to be a navigate command to start moving toward the object, a center command to look toward the object. And then once you've gotten there, if you want it to spin, get a little closer, get a little further away, move it up and down, any of those things, that's where you're going to use orientation animations. Okay. And this is the one part that looks a little goofy because, again, Clint has to kind of figure out a way to get this to work a little better, where it moves as if we're in local orientation. I do want to show you guys one thing that I think you'll like a lot as well in this. I'm going to bring my pre-flight interface up again. Those of you who have attended many, many institutes will remember that I sometimes get a wee bit grumpy when we start getting into the subject of taking off from the Earth and flying to locations. And the reason for that is just because Starry Night has always handled them really poorly. It's just a kind of an unattractive thing in Starry Night to see us lifting off from the Earth. Part of that problem, again, was that the moment we began lifting off from the Earth, Starry Night was going through all that craziness where it was trying to recenter our view. And so we would end up kind of looking at the ground in that sort of oddly pinched version of the horizon. One thing I'd like to show you is what it looks like now if we lift off directly from the Earth and do one of these navigations. Sun's in the sky, so I think I'll choose Mercury just because I know it's directly overhead. But take a look at how a navigation looks now if we just lift off from Earth. I am no longer grumpy. It really solves that problem as well. You'll remember that Starry Night would kind of spin us and make us look down, and sometimes we see that kind of bizarre, look like the South Pole or something because the continents are all kind of clumped together. This also allows us to take off from the surface of the Earth in a good way. All right. And then the beauty of this is if somebody raises their hand and says, gee, I'd like to go back to Earth, all you got to do is click on the Earth as a navigate, click on center it as another favorite file. It's trivial. You don't even have to think about it. You're just going to fly up to the Earth again in a very pretty way. Okay, so what I'd like to do is just a little bit more review on the process of building these animations and how we're going to build a script, just so that folks who are not familiar with orientation animations get a little taste. For orientation animations, there are detailed course notes. So if not all of this sticks, it's not a big deal, but I'd like to build this out one more time. So let's just start here. I think we'll keep it really simple and we'll just fly to the moon, and we'll do this as an orientation animation of going to the moon. I think I'll just use this as my starting point here. So I'm going to save this as a favorite. And this time I'm going to call the new favorite, let's just call it start 2. Okay. And for my script, what I'm going to do is fly to the moon. So the very first thing I need to do, I'm going to actually just clear all this stuff out, leave my black scene in place here.
Scott, while you do that, we have a question in the chat that I think might be quite useful. Emma asks if we can use tval to capture the navigation movements in ATM4 until the favorites are created.
No. First of all, I just want to be correct. When you say tval, I think you mean Q capture. Yes. Tval is an old thing we invented for Keith Johnson where you could type Starry Night syntax in. I think you mean capturing the Q and it gets dropped onto ATM4. Yes. I think so.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah. No, it's okay. It's just I'm trying to. We've been saying tval incorrectly for like 5 years, and it's a different command. That's a Q capture. No, these I'm going to show you in just a minute. These are very specific little clusters of Starry Night syntax. It's about 9 lines of Starry Night syntax. A Q capture would only capture one little bit. So we need about 9 values. So it will have to be done as these little favorites files. But you could get into that little favorite file very, very easily and very quickly. And in the future, sometime a year from now or 6 months from now, we could probably modify Q capture to just capture this thing. But currently right now, if you tried to do it, I think it would break everything. So. All right, so I'm going to load in my script this new start that I created. So scene, favorite, go into my navigation, and somewhere down here I should see start 2. Okay, and the next thing I want to do, I think I'll actually put a pause in here so I can decide when our flight happens, just to be kind of thorough about things. And then the next scene is going to be what I just called moon, which means navigate to the moon. Somewhere down here, I ought to see a thing called moon. Do I? I do. And that was moon, right? It wasn't center moon. Did I just make a mistake? Yeah, it's moon. Okay. And then let's say just right as we take off, just after we take off, we're going to center it as well. So my favorite is going to be called center moon. And I'm going to do that.
You didn't turn down the transition time.
Pardon me?
You didn't turn down the transition time to 0.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Great. Let's pretend like I did that on purpose so somebody would catch it. Because I am not that smart. Here we go. Thanks. Okay. So shouldn't see much of anything happen here. We've got that opening scene. And then what happened? Well, that's interesting. I'm sorry, guys. I do not know what happened there.
You were looking at pre-flight instead of renderbox.
Pardon me?
You were looking at pre-flight, so you don't see what ATM4 tells it to do.
You'd think after 19 years of doing this, I'd remember these kinds of things. Thank you. All right. One more time. I'm not sure what is going on here. Some of this is a little bit unreliable, but let's say we're flying away, we're going. Okay, it's just taking a while to get itself to that scene position. There we go. All right.
I think it's because the Earth queue you have in there is the nav queue and not a regular favorite file of Earth.
Well, wasn't that start 2?
Oh, maybe.
In any case, we've flown to the moon. Okay. And then once we've arrived at the moon, the next thing we want to do is an orientation animation. Let's say in this case, we want to spin us around to the light side of the moon. This is where we're going to make what's called an orientation animation. I'm going to bring up Starry Night again, and you'll notice we're likely not necessarily in sync. I want to make sure that pre-flight is doing absolutely what my render box was doing. And so I'm going to do a refresh just to make sure that the moon is exactly the way we want it. And all I'm going to do is just turn the moon so that we're looking at its light side. So the way orientation animation works is any little thing that I do in Starry Night, if I wiggle the thing around, if I spin it, fly up toward it, drag it down toward the bottom of the dome, ATM4 is kind of waiting now. It's buffered that command and it's waiting for me to put that in as an orientation animation. So once I'm happy, once I've done a little movement that I like here, if I go back into Starry Night, and I put in what's called an orientation animation, then that little transition, that spin that I just did, I can tell it to do that very slowly. Okay. So let's just put start 2 up here and make sure it works properly. There we go. There's start 2. And now if we run our script, what we should see is we start flying toward the moon, and at the same time, we start looking toward the moon. And what this OA should do for us is just spin the moon around. All right, so is everybody sort of understanding now the how we're going to divide up these navigations versus orientation animation? Any basic confusion on what we will do when? I will, keep everybody posted on, like, when we get these steps working really cleanly. We have a few things to work out. And again, we haven't completely decided on the user interface for how we make these things. What I was thinking of was like 2 ways of doing it. One is right-clicking on the object and say, make a navigation favorite. Right-click on the object and say, make a center favorite. Or when we go up to our favorites menu, maybe under favorites, there's a navigate to, and you put in the body that you want to go to, and that automatically makes a navigation favorite. Or up in favorites, we say center on, and that makes a center on that object. Those are 2 ways I can imagine doing it. For our more advanced users, does anybody see any problems with doing either of those? Those seem pretty intuitive to me.
I have a different idea for you.
Please, I would love to hear it.
So when you right click on something and
Yes.
use navigate to, that pops up a little window that selects, are you going to fly to it or are you going to center it? And also gives you the option of how long it's going to take.
That was one of the ideas we threw around, and the only drawback that was identified with that is that you might want to use navigate to instantly fly you to a place as a live effect. Now, it could be both, right? We could say navigate to, and if you don't want to put any values in, you could hit enter, and that would just take you flying off. But my thinking here was maybe leave this alone because you would want to use it the way you used to use Go There. So I would be cool one way or the other. A thought was navigate to brings up a dialogue, but maybe you hit spacebar and it ignores the dialogue and you just go flying off anyway. I'm not hearing any dissent with that. That might be a good way to do it. So navigate to, and then you type in Mars or you type in whatever. The other challenge with that is we would have to probably come up with a center that's a little differently called, right? You don't want to have center call up a dialogue. So maybe it's nav center or center nav or something like that. So maybe that's a third way to do all these things. Okay. All right.
I like that idea. I don't know. The whole idea of saving a favorite seems a little
roundabout.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. It is a little confusing to think of these as favorites. Another approach to this was rather than these living in the favorites pane at all, you could just open up a pane called the navigate pane, and they kind of look like favorites, but maybe they're really different, right? A navigate has a different character than a center. So maybe rather than ever calling them favorites or associating them with favorites, maybe we add navigation up here and we say navigate to, and it builds this list. Does that seem maybe a little more intuitive? I'm
Yes,
seeing a couple
I
of
like
yeses.
that a lot better.
Just divorce it from favorites altogether.
Yeah,
Yeah.
especially because like every user makes their own favorites, but in theory, these would essentially be the same for everyone.
Yeah, the only argument for doing it as favorites, and again, I'm not locked into this, but in the layered earth world, you fly to places with favorites, and in the zygote world, you fly to places with favorites. So maybe we don't exclude the ability to build favorites that do this, but maybe that's not the only way to do it. Maybe that's sort of a background, weird, different way to do it, perhaps.
If you do them as a second list of favorites, can you get like your normal favorites and those
Maybe we could divide the
without
window
hogging
top.
more screen space?
Maybe divide the window top bottom. The whole top is a scroll bar that's through your favorites. The whole bottom is a scroll bar that's through your navigation, something like
Yeah,
that.
because I
perhaps.
could see when you're doing a live show that you might need to click on one or the other.
I'm going to do a quick survey, if you guys don't mind. Raise your hand if you dislike the idea of these being favorites. If you don't want them to be called favorites at all, please raise your hand. If you just don't like favorites for navigation. About a third of you, a quarter of you. Okay, so I'm going to assume the rest of you would be okay with that. So I'm going to think of this like they could be favorites if you really want them to be, but it sounds like we also want a different part of the UI that's really kind of called navigation. Does that sound like an okay compromise? Raise your hand if that's an okay compromise. So they could be a favorite, but we're going to have a whole sort of navigation system too. Yes, I see a lot of hands going up. All right, good.
Hey,
good.
Scott,
Yes.
is the plan to eventually have a way to run this through ATM4 where you just have a navigate queue for ATM4?
Yeah. I think that seems like a no-brainer, and I assumed we would just do that. Is if you clicked in ATM4, a new queue would be navigate to, and even if that's a favorite, all that does is automatically select that favorite, right? Totally. You don't want to have to build a favorite and think about a favorite in order to do it in ATM4. There will be a navigate to and center on queue as its own completely default thing in ATM4. All right. The reason I'm exposing you guys to a little bit of this complexity is that I do want to show you, if anybody desperately wants to do this right now, if you want to do this in shows and not wait a couple of months for us to send you out this patch, I want to teach everybody how you do this, okay? In order to do this, you have to have a couple of these favorites, okay? And what I've done here is I've created a generic favorite down here called navigate and a generic favorite called center, okay? And they're just the ones that allow you to build these. You could also take any one of these and just edit, but I'm going to open up a navigate favorite. So I'm going to go reveal file. For those of you who don't know how to get to the file, if you right click on any favorite and you say reveal file, it takes you to the folder that has all that's favorites in it. And down here, I have the one called navigate. Couple of little rules. You want to open these in WordPad, or Dave's got, I think, Notepad++, but you don't want to open them just in Notepad. You either want to open them in WordPad or WordPad++, okay? So when I double click on it, it automatically opens it in WordPad, okay? I am in WordPad. And there's just one thing that you're worried about right now with Navigate, and that is the place that it's going to take you, okay? You'll notice it says destination name, and I can put in here whatever I want, like Earth. Okay. I also have a time value, and I can tell it to take a really long time or a really short time. So I can set this to 60 or whatever, 50, 40, 20 seconds, whatever. Okay. Now, one thing I've noticed in Win 10, maybe you guys can get me around this, but I've noticed in Win 10, If in WordPad, if I just hit Control Save right now, it's going to save it as a .txt file. It's not going to save it as an SNF file. Please jump in and tell me if there's a workaround. But what I've been doing here is I've been going Save As, and I save this as like whatever I want to call it. Navigate Earth. Bad spelling. And then I make sure I type .snf. Okay. In Win 10, for whatever reason, WordPad will put in a .txt file extension. So does anybody know a workaround for that? Yeah, I was afraid of that. I find it'll make a text file unless I type .snf. Okay. We'll save. All right. That's it. You've just made this favorite. So all you're worried about in all these values, you can ignore all of these. The one thing you want to make sure, though, take a close look at this very last thing. Ignore planet coordinates value is true. What that means is it's going to do that thing where it backs away and it doesn't spin the sky in any way. If ignore planet coordinates is set to true, then all you're going to do is back away and it won't attempt to do any centering. If ignore planet coordinates is set to false, then it is going to try to center it for you. All right. So you can build a navigate favorite that'll center for you. You would just set that to false. But if you're looking for the thing where all you do is back away, you want that set to true. Okay. And then once I've saved this and I refresh my favorites, I should say navigate Earth. Okay. So if I
This
go
may
to
be a
Jupiter,
dumb question, Scott.
oh,
but
okay. Sorry. What's the question?
do we have to have your files that say this in order to do that? Or is there a favorite that we can create to make the navigate file?
No, here's why. A regular favorite, start. Oh, cancel. Sorry. A regular favorite, reveal file. Start is all this stuff. You don't want all this stuff because this is going to break everything else in the file is going to break navigation.
If we did a screen capture of your navigate file and then edited a favorite file to read the same and then saved it and renamed it to navigate, will it function like yours?
You know what would be way, way easier? Send me an email and I'll send you these favorites. I think that would probably be a little easier.
Well, why don't we just put these up
Course
with
notes.
Or we can, yeah, or we can put them up where you can get them. But I would love to just give these to everybody, right? So you can just play with them and do what you want rather than having to build this. I know, it sounds like Linda, you kind of like the exercise of building it. You would learn, it would be a very teachable moment, right? But to make it easy to start with, we'll either upload them somewhere where you can get to them, or I'll email them to you or whatever. Okay. That way, all you need to worry about is the destination, how long it takes, and whether this value is set to true. Okay. And as you can imagine, if you open one of the center ones, the only values you're worried about are what you're centering on, that word, right? How long it's going to be, and whether ignore planet coordinates is set to true. One thing you guys are going to run into, I apologize for this, in the center one, this value is just 15. If I set this to 10,000, Brad, unless I'm wrong, we still don't have a time value that really works for centering. Is that correct?
unless Clint changed it and didn't tell us.
Yeah, and remember this pre-flight build we're using is way back in whatever, April or March or whatever. So I'm sorry, guys, when you change this value in center, it's still going to take us exactly the same amount of time to center. So if you keep putting in a new value and it's ignoring you, that's not because you're doing it wrong. It's because right now Clint still needs to get that working. Okay. So all you need to do is open that favorite, tell it where you're going, make sure that if you don't want it to center automatically for you, that ignore planet coordinates is set to true. And in the case of the navigate one, the flying there, you can set a duration. It takes 10 seconds to do it or 60 seconds to do it or whatever. Okay. So we've got just a couple more minutes. Does anybody have any big questions about this, or am I missing any questions in the chat?
Scott, I have a question. If you don't
Yes.
mind my jumping in. I noticed in the favorite file, it references pre-flight Mac, and is that because of your particular setup where you're running this on Windows Boot Camp on a Mac?
Oh,
Or is it supposed to say Windows?
I have no idea. Clint is not with us, is he? We don't have Clint in this session. No, maybe. I have no idea. I never thought about it. I've only changed those values that I've talked about. So that would be a
Only
great
reason-
question for Clint.
Yeah, definitely. Because the only reason I asked that is because if you were to share those files with everybody and they're all running Windows, I wonder if it'll work.
That's a great question. What I can do right after the session is maybe I'll just send one to Brad and have him check it in real Windows, not in Windows, Mac Windows, and
Sure.
just make sure it doesn't break it. But that's a really good catch. Thanks for looking at that.
It might just be a vestige of Starry Night originally coded for Macs, but yeah, we'll test that out.
Excellent question, though. All right, any other questions?
Scott, just total aesthetics question. If you were on Earth and you did the takeoff thing that looked really good, what if the planet is directly behind your location?
Well, that's a really good question. Let's go to PM. Who's visible? Who are you? You are Venus. Well, yeah, let's put Venus. Sorry about that. PM. That was Venus, right? And let's put Venus.
Yeah, put it on the meridian and then throw it behind you.
And then I should be able to go. I'm not liking that. Who are you? Jupiter. Okay. So if I'm thinking about Scott, you moron. One more time. So if I do that, let's just try this. Let's just try going to Venus and see what we get here.
Venus is in front.
Yeah, it should be right by there. So somebody, if you got your Starry Night open, somebody, I'm getting wrapped around my astronomy knowledge here. So what can somebody tell me what, let's see, if it were midnight, haha, I just got kind of smart. If it were midnight and I went to Mercury, shouldn't that do it?
That'd be close enough, yeah.
Right. So now midnight and let's do a Mercury. I think that little nudge was getting the Earth out of the way, right? It had one little tiny bump.
That's nice.
But I really like that. In fact, in a way, it's kind of prettier because we get to see the limit of the Earth there.
That's still really cool. Okay, cool.
So for style purposes, what we could do is just park it just enough off center that we didn't get that little bump, but we would get that beautiful fly over the Earth. Glad you asked. That's a good question. Okay, we're up against our time. In fact, I'm a few minutes late. So thanks for your patience, everybody. I hope this direction we're going for navigation is going to yield some good results, and hopefully all the kind of craziness that we used to experience with orientation animations is a little bit solved as well. So, all right.
Thank you, Scott.
You bet. Take care, everybody.